Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Labor Day to you. It is September after all. Hopefully those of you got a nice day off today. Those of you who are at work, thanks for joining me here on Let's Talk Tropics on Acadiana Weather today on this September the 2nd. Hopefully everybody's going to have a nice week here. We are talking about some tropical weather out there, although when we left you on Friday, there was a little bit more that I would say would be kind of threatening us, but this time around it looks like things have changed a little bit more as we're still watching several tropical waves out there, but maybe not as much action coming toward the northern part of the Gulf Coast. Of course, that could change. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. First of all, really nice day across Acadiana on this Labor Day. Kind of surprising as we've had that trough of low pressure off in the offshore waters. It brought us the rain on Friday and Saturday, then kind of broke up a little bit yesterday, and today even nicer. 87, that heat index at 94 with a dew point of 72, 61% that humidity, and a nice breeze out of the northeast at 9. I don't know about y'all, but I have got fall fever major, and anytime we get temperatures that are below 90 at noontime, it almost feels like, wow, is this real life? Is this really going to be fall? And I do think we've got a decent cold front that might be coming in toward the weekend to give us another little taste of fall. But there's a look at our traffic cams. You can see there's plenty of sunshine out there. A few clouds are starting to build here and there, and we might see a couple of isolated showers and thunderstorms later this afternoon, but the rain chance only about 40%, so a far cry from the coverage of rain that we saw early in this holiday weekend. Right now, most of the action is in the offshore waters, and I think most of it's going to stay there with some daytime heating. There will be a few pop-ups here and there, but again, the coverage isn't going to be great, so our friends that are working out in the offshore waters might be seeing a little bit more thunderstorm activity out there. And if you were planning on doing some boating, nearshore waters aren't so bad, but you get a little bit farther in the offshore waters, those seas are running a little bit rougher, about 3 to 4 feet on the seas, and those winds at times might be out of the east at about 15 to 20 knots. So not a great day out there, but not a terrible day either compared to what we've seen over the course of this holiday weekend. So let's get started on the satellite imagery. Very pleasant weather for most of the country. We're looking at that tropical wave, or that tropical disturbance, or low pressure trough, whatever you want to call it, that's there still off of the Texas Gulf Coast, and it's been a focal point for some showers and thunderstorms. It is kind of drifting away from the Louisiana coastline right now, kind of pushing off in more of a southwesterly direction here for a couple of days. And then as a front starts to approach from the north, I think it's going to draw this back inland. So today and tomorrow, coverage of rain a little bit less, but getting into Wednesday and Thursday, I think there's going to be a decent amount of moisture in place and an upper trough to go along with it. So showers and thunderstorms are going to be much more likely into Wednesday and Thursday. And then we'll talk about that front a little farther down the road. Bit of a low pressure area over the far western part of the Caribbean Sea, right about in here. That's going to go ahead and drift off toward the west. Might throw a little extra tropical moisture going up through the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico to kind of feed into that rain event that we're going to be seeing later on this week. And as far as the Caribbean, most of you who were with me on Friday, we were watching the tropical wave when it was way out in the Atlantic. Well, this tropical wave right now has made it through the Windward and Leeward Islands, and it's kind of a broken wave. You've got some convection north of Puerto Rico. You got a little bit more here in the central part of the Caribbean, and maybe a little bit more going down into the southern Windward Islands. So it isn't anything that's very organized in nature, but a lot of the tropical models are still indicating this is going to be pushing off toward the west. I don't think it's going to have much chance for development here in the next 3 days, but as it gets over into this particular area south of Jamaica, conditions appear to be a lot more favorable for some tropical development, and the models are still picking up on it, but not as robust as what we left you with on Friday. But there are other tropical waves that have now emerged off of the African coast. We've got this tropical wave here that we've been watching. We've got one out here in the middle part of the Atlantic, and we've got yet another one that's just come off of the African coast, and a little better view of that eastern Atlantic. You can see it is a decent amount of moisture that's coming off, and a lot of these tropical waves have been fighting dry air and Saharan dust for most of the hurricane season, and also some decent wind shear out in the Atlantic Ocean. But That has suppressed a lot of the activity during the month of August, but I'm not so sure if it's going to hang on for the month of September. Now, does that mean there's going to be something spinning its way in our direction? Well, I don't really see any of that right now, but the season is still young. We haven't even reached the peak of the hurricane season. But National Hurricane Center, according to the morning update, and the new update's going to be coming up here in about maybe 30 or 40 minutes, but it's still calling for a medium chance for development of the tropical wave over the eastern part of the Caribbean. But as I said, probably not for a couple, 3 more days until it's at least south of Jamaica, and it may wait to develop until it gets closer to the Yucatan. The longer it waits to develop, the better it is for us on our forecast here locally. Another tropical wave over the eastern part of the Atlantic also has a medium chance for development. It's just coming off the African coast right now. I really think that one is going to go ahead and stay out over the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It won't be much of a concern for anybody. And then that little X that you still see there off of the Texas coast, there's still a very, very slim chance that a trough of low pressure that brought us the rain early in the weekend has a chance. I've got one model that still continues to play with this, and that's the Icon model, and it's been playing with this thing in the Gulf of Mexico since we had a cold front come through about, a week and a half, almost 2 weeks ago, that settled over Florida, and then we had that upper low kind of drift across the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico. So the Icon model's been wanting to develop this, but obviously it hasn't, so the Icon has not been very trustworthy. But I will say the Icon is picking up a little bit more on the tropical wave now that's over the eastern part of the Caribbean, and we'll kind of get into those in just a little bit. Water temperatures, of course, are sky high all through the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the western part of the Atlantic. These numbers are in Celsius, but the magic number is 26.5. That's your 80-degree number. So everything that's on this map, with the exception of areas along the coast from the Carolinas through the Delmarva going northward, pretty much everywhere else in the Caribbean as well as the Atlantic and the development zone of the Atlantic Ocean is well warm enough to support any tropical systems. And we also watch the tropical cyclone heat potential, which is not just the surface temperatures, but how deep that 80-degree water goes. And this is Cuba right here, Dominican Republic and Haiti and Jamaica right here, northern Gulf Coast right up here. I know this map is a little bit hard to see where the land areas are, but the area here across the central part of the Caribbean Sea, which is kind of the forecast of where this tropical wave is expected to kind of drift off toward the west. If it does move west of Jamaica, it's going to get into that high tropical cyclone heat potential and might have a better chance because there's going to be considerably less wind shear going on through the rest of the week over parts of the Caribbean Sea. Again, the hurricane season has really been inhibited by 3 things: Saharan dust, dry air, and wind shear. And the Saharan dust is starting to pull away. The dry air is also starting to pull away. But look at all this low wind shear out here in the middle part of the Caribbean Sea. This is the scale here. So this is low wind shear. And then when you get into the reds, you get into the high wind shear. So basically all of this across the Caribbean and then going on, cursor doesn't want to do anything with me today, but it's going to go move off toward the west, and I think wind shear is going to stay somewhat low over the western part of the Gulf of Mexico going into the latter part of the week. And there's a quick look at the Saharan dust map. It is eroded quite a bit. So some of the tropical waves that are coming out here off the African coast and moving off toward the west are not encountering the dry air and the Saharan dust quite as much. And because the wind shear is considerably lower over this particular area, perhaps some of these tropical waves, when they're in their formation stage, might have a better chance for some development over the next couple of days. So let's go into the model suite here, and we're going to start with the GFS. And the GFS has really not been too robust on developing that tropical wave over the eastern Atlantic, or eastern part of the Caribbean rather. And it's also been very, very slow to move it off toward the west. So as it replays here, you can see there's a good amount of tropical moisture that makes its way into the western part of the Caribbean. But it doesn't take, it takes a few days for a low pressure area to develop. And then it just kind of continues to move off toward the west, pushing into Mexico and Central America. So that's good news for us. Euro model has not really picked up on this tropical wave, hardly at all, although there's a little bit of a pressure drop there as we get into Thursday and Friday of this week, but there's still a decent amount of moisture that reaches the Yucatan Peninsula and maybe a bit of a low pressure area, but you may have noticed in those last few frames, the low pressure area stays way far to the south and might actually cross over to the Pacific and could become something. So the Euro model just doesn't want to bite at all on this tropical wave at all. Canadian model was pretty robust for the mid part of last week, and then when we left you on Friday, it kind of just wiped this thing out and really didn't have anything there. But now it's starting to pick up on somewhat of a bit of a low pressure area, kind of working its way across the Caribbean Sea. The Canadian model has been considerably faster, bringing that low, and that's going into Monday of next week and Tuesday. So it is a lot faster than what the GFS was suggesting. And the Icon, as I've said, has been doing nothing but basically playing around with the trough that's right here off the Texas coast over the last several days. It's still doing that, but it seems to be backing off a little bit. But if you notice to the south, there is more of a low pressure area, and that's part of that tropical wave that's now in the eastern Caribbean. But notice it goes into the Bay of Campeche, but again, remember, the Icon's been trying to develop this, but it's also been developing this one out here for a long time. So it hasn't happened just yet. So we'll just kind of have to watch and wait and see what goes on. So let's just kind of go out almost a week. We're going to go to Sunday morning and kind of stop the models here just to show you the comparison between the four of them. And the reason I'm stopping here on Sunday is because most of them have a general area of low pressure somewhere in that Central American region, Bay of Campeche, Western Caribbean, or right along the Yucatan Peninsula. And on Sunday morning, you can see the GFS does have a low pressure area, which could be a tropical depression or tropical storm, making its way toward the Yucatan Peninsula. And if you saw the animations earlier, it just basically takes it off toward the west and moves it into Mexico. The Euro model, again, really has not been focusing on this tropical wave. It's just been keeping some moisture kind of working its way west. But you do notice there's a bit of a low there. That might be the tropical wave crossing over Central America and then maybe becoming something on the Pacific side. And then you might notice this kind of sharp line right here. That's a cold front that could be moving in this weekend and allowing some cooler, drier air to reach the Gulf Coast. Will that influence this? Probably not. It looks like it would miss it, and the GFS kind of misses it as well. Canadian model stopping again. We're going all the way out to Sunday morning, so we're just kind of giving you about 5 or 6 days notice here. Canadian also has a bit of a low pressure area making its way into the Bay of Campeche. That, of course, with that tropical wave kind of working its way off to the west. You also will notice there's a front here. And most of the models are indicating some cooler, drier air reaching us over the course of the weekend where we might get some temperatures in the 60s. But will this actually pick this up? Well, probably not initially, but some extended models bring this maybe back around and kind of get it pulled up into a frontal boundary and pulled back toward the north and east after that. And the Icon model is also showing the frontal boundary, maybe making a little bit more progress into the Gulf of Mexico, but then it just kind of has this fester out here over the Bay of Campeche. So right now, at least going through Sunday, we don't have anything threatening, but we'll kind of have to wait and see if a low develops on the end of this front, or if the front just kind of stalls out here and something maybe wants to fester over here in the Bay of Campeche. So there's a couple of models that are suggesting some of that, but whether or not it's able to lift its way back toward the northern Gulf Coast, that's still kind of off the record right now, or kind of not the scenario. But again, the Icon model only goes out 7 days. This is almost the limit of what we're seeing on the Icon model. And the other models go out 10 days with the GFS going out 16. And the GFS takes this low, basically continuing it on toward the west, no front picking it up and just pushing it off into Mexico. So that's kind of what we're going with right now. But it's always best to make sure that you're ready for anything because we are getting into September. Right now, we are a little bit bit behind schedule. Even though we had a very quiet August, we were still ahead of schedule when it came to the named storms. We've got 5 under our belt, and usually the 6th one comes by the end of September, and the 7th one comes by about on average by tomorrow. So right now we're a little bit behind on named storms, but as far as hurricanes and major hurricanes, we are still well ahead of time. And as far as the frequency, we are getting closer and closer to the peak of the hurricane season. We're right about here right now on September the 2nd. September the 10th is considered the peak. And usually going out to about October the 15th is when there's a threat for us here along the Gulf Coast, and then that threat really starts to go down as you head into November and December. So about the next 6 to 7 weeks, generally about 75% or 80% of all of our named storms will happen during this time frame as we look back on average over the past several years. And as far as September, as I've said, most of the Atlantic Ocean is open for business. So what this map represents is the number of storms that have passed through a certain area during the month of September. And of course, the mid part of the Atlantic, you get a lot of these named storms develop, and then they work their way toward the northern Leeward Islands, and a lot of them do curve out into the Atlantic Ocean. And that's where the bulk of the September storms do happen. More than 70 of those have happened between 1944 and today. Notice the Gulf of Mexico. There's the orange spot there. So out of all of the named storms that have happened during the month of September, between 50 and 70 of those have passed basically right along the Gulf Coast of Louisiana or have made landfall. So September is normally a very busy month here along the South Louisiana coast, which is why you need to make sure you stay prepared. And as I left you on Friday, I said, hey, if you're out over the weekend, try to pick up a few of these things. There's no emergencies right now. There's nothing that's coming in our direction, but it's always great to have just the basics ready to go. And if you could look at this list and maybe pick 5 of those, and you can score these between now and the end of this week, you will be ahead of most folks, because as you know, when there's something threatening the Acadiana region, that's when everybody runs out to the stores. That's when you can't find the water, the batteries, or the flashlights, and all of the other things that people try to panic buy when there's a storm coming. So if you can go out and get some of these things that are shelf stable, and you get all these things this week, then if anything were to come next weekend or the following week, at least you would have a big time head start on having these things ready to go. And one of the most important things on there is check out your, make sure your IDs, insurance, and your important papers are in a secure place, and also save them as digital. And I will invite you to go over to Acadiana Weather Today, our morning show that I did this morning at 7:30. Ritter Consulting Engineers is my sponsor for a couple of days a week for that. And they really have some excellent tools to help you prepare before the storm and after the storm, and particularly when it comes to insurance, something that might save you a lot of headaches. If you've been through a hurricane and you've had damage or major damage to your house and you've had to deal with insurance companies, you know what a nightmare that is. So take a little time to go visit my channel, and if you would, check out my sponsor. You can also find a link to my sponsor on my Facebook and my Facebook page as well. So if you're on my social media, you probably have already noticed Ritter Consulting Engineers. So check them out too. They can help out before and after the storm. Well, that's what I've got for you on this Labor Day. Don't want to keep you too long. Looks like I've got you here for about 20 minutes this time around. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also turn on those notifications. That way you know when the next video drops right here on Acadiana Weather Today. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy your Labor Day. If you're off, if you have to work, I'm sorry about that, but I hope you have a great day, and I will see you on Tuesday.